It is June 3rd. All rise. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Eileen, can you call roll?
Mayor Driver?
Here.
Mr. Bunyan?
Here.
Mr. Campion?
Here.
Mr. Cook?
Here.
Mrs. Engelhardt is on her way. Mrs. Pedrick? Mr. Budney?
Here.
Mr. Hain?
Here.
Ms. Giffen? Here. Mr. Townsend?
Here.
Mr. Hill?
Here.
Ms. Kaczynski?
Here.
Ms. McManus?
Here.
And Mr. Clerico and Mr. Troutman are excused.
Okay, item number 1 on the agenda, as it always is a slot for public comments. There are no members of the public in the audience, so let's move on to item number 2, which are mayor comments.
So only a couple of things. We did have a request. I met with the developer Bemis. They're working with the property owner of the Bemis factory. Asked us to do an overlay there, as we talked about in the 2015 master plan re-examination, to allow a mixed-use residential there, and I'll be bringing that up to council to see if would like to do that. And that is the only thing I have.
Well, that's great. Sounds encouraging. Item number 3 on the agenda, council items.
Council unanimously move forward the revisions to the sign ordinances, or revised sign ordinances.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I forgot to bring something up. Can I speak again?
Can we have a motion to amend the agenda?
The Opportunity Zone Summit is
Oh,
on
that's
July
right.
11th. Okay, Todd will talk more about that.
And we could tag team that. I'm sorry, it's been a long day. Item number 4, approval of the minutes from the May 21st regular meeting. I need a motion and a second.
Second.
Eileen?
Mr. Hain?
Yes.
Ms. Giffen?
Yes.
Mr. Campion?
Yes.
Mayor Driver?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Abstain.
Mrs. Pedrick?
Yes.
Mr. Bunyan?
Yeah.
Mr. Budney?
Yes.
Mr. Townsend?
Abstain.
Item number 5 on the agenda reads as public hearing for sign ordinances, but I'm going to allow Kara the opportunity to introduce this subject with the proper terminology.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the board's edification, according to statute, the sign ordinances that Councilman Runyon indicated the council had adopted on first reading are now before you for review and recommendation and adoption of a report. The statute requires that within 35 days of referral to the planning board review and make recommendations as to the revisions to the ordinance and their consistency with the master plan. If there are any inconsistencies, you have to make recommendations with regard to those and issue a report back to the council for them to consider at the second reading on the ordinances. Excuse me. The review that you're going to do tonight is not required by the municipal land use law to be a public hearing, so you do not have to take any public comment, any public questions. You are, of course, free to do as you see fit, but it is not a statutory requirement.
Okay. I was glad and happy to entertain public comments because I know that there were a few members of the public that had made comments when it was at council last time and had made comments here when we certainly would want to hear from members of the public, because even though their opportunity is to speak in front of the council, I'm not sure the council has as much detail and information that we all would have that will fall upon you, Chris, at the council meeting. If there is something that's very specific in nature that a member of the public may be confused at. I do think that the changes that we had made prior really incorporated some, I don't think all, of public comments, things that we were not thinking about. specifically from memory, was the 2 signs along 500 footage of highway. We had said they needed 2 entrances in order to get the 2 signs. I thought that was a wise change. A max letter height that we've never had in the borough at 18 inches. That was from a member of the public. I don't remember if there was anything other specifically that didn't come from either Chris's comments, Betsy's comments, somebody else's comments. I think they were the most members of the public that we had. But I know you all had conversation at the meeting that I missed. So if there's other discussion, typically what happens now, because we sent it over to council, that doesn't have to happen that way. Just like earlier when Betsy said, oh, she's gonna refer to ask the council about amending zoning, then it would come to us for review. So we're essentially reviewing what we've already asked for, but now we have to make our recommendations with findings as far as consistency to the master plan.
That's correct, and you did make a very good point also that everyone should be aware of, that when it does go back to the council for second reading, that is when they are required to have a public meeting and a public hearing, and all members of the public will be able to comment on at that time, after which the council will then vote with regard to the ordinance changes and the recommendations, if any, that are made by this board.
So Beth, do you have, can you give a brief synopsis of, from a consistency perspective with the master plan for us?
Yeah, so the sign ordinance changes that are before you this evening are specifically consistent with the master plan. It's not just that they're simply not inconsistent, but your 2015 reexamination report has an entire section titled Revise the Sign Ordinance. And in there, it makes a number of recommendations. It says, just for the highlights, it says that the A-frame sign should be permitted in pedestrian-oriented commercial districts. It says that blade or projection signs should be permitted. It also talks about the need to ensure consistency and the need, consistency between the narrative and the table, and the need to balance competing interests of aesthetics and commercial visibility. So it provides some pretty general guidance as to how the borough should have reviewed its sign ordinance and the types of changes that should have been made, which I do think are specifically consistent with the changes in the ordinance. Yes, the ordinance goes into more detail, goes a little bit above and beyond that which is specified in the reexamination report, but that has no impact on whether or not it's consistent. It is specifically consistent with the master plan.
Okay, and you brought up a good point, especially for the new members of the board. So there are other elements of the reexamination report from 2015 that we really never asked the council to adopt as ordinances. You know, we typically run things by, well, it's in the re-exam report, so if somebody was to come in front of us, even something that's not changed yet from an ordinance perspective, it's in that report. So, but I think it's incumbent upon us, we want to take another look at that and say, are there other recommendations that are still sitting out there? Because again, I think I go back to, it's embarrassing that we had a recommendation to add blade signs in 2015 and we're pushing 2020 to add. So I think it just shows how complicated things are and how you open up Pandora's box and you want to change more and more. So thank you for that. And so, so Chris, in your assessment, is there anything that is still outstanding from that you can remember? I did think of one other thing like that. There was a member of the public that had suggested that we add in murals and the review of murals, and it just seemed to really open up Pandora's box then. And we said, you know what, this was just meant to clean things up. But that could come up as an option to say, don't you want the sign review committee to review murals as well? I mean, I don't have anything against it. It was just, I didn't want it to take that long. It took that long anyway. But I certainly wouldn't want that to uphold the approval of this ordinance, which was just really meant to clean things up and speed things up for business owners. So my recommendation, should that come up, because I do remember that comment, would be to say, well, that's great, but let's look at the merits of this ordinance, and we could always come back and do another one. But I would recommend to hold that back, to add that in at this point. And that's just my take. And honestly, I don't remember a lot of the other elements, other than the changes to things like size of signs, and could you really have an awning plus a facade? And I thought we sort of made it so you really, it doesn't make it massive. It just makes you able to do, Starbucks coffee, logo on the awning, logo on the glass, hours on the door, something like that, and a blade sign. So, anyway, that was a long intro to my question. Mr. Ryan, sorry.
Not to my recollection, do I recall.
Yeah.
Anything, I think we've addressed
And I think that,
residents' concerns and more.
now there could be, again, there could be new concerns based on this, but again, I'm not sure. And
I think that given the kind of thorough overhaul and review that we have spent on this, that if anything we missed, or if murals become an issue, that we want to go before the sign review committee, which I'm a little loath to have done, just because there's an artistic element on there as well. I think that those can be addressed on a one-off basis.
Murals aren't signs, and shouldn't be addressed in this,
Exactly.
in this discussion at all.
yeah, that's a good response, that murals aren't signs, this is.
What if it's
So that was my response the first time, and that's my response tonight.
What if it's a mural that advertises?
We can address that when the time comes. The point is, I don't think that we have the, I don't think we have the energy to
No, I
address
agree.
that.
No, I
as
know.
well,
I don't
because that was not what the intention of this revision was.
I was just trying to, since there are no members of the public, if there will be members of the public at the council meeting, so, and whether or not even if we are there as members of the planning board, we can't respond to the public at that point in time. So I wanted to get anything that could possibly come up for both our liaison, Chris, as well as Betsy, to say like, listen, this would be our response to that.
I'd say anything that's not addressed in this ordinance proposal right now isn't addressed. It's default to what the existing ordinance is now. If there comes a time when we feel, and in the near or far future, that some of these other issues should be addressed, that's fine and dandy, but let's get
Go
this.
with it.
Yeah.
So it's like the recommendation of, well, let's get this out and let's make a recommendation to the planning board to now look at whatever else might come up. That would, right? And that, in other words, you just know what I'm saying. Instead of dragging this ordinance, keep dragging it through, if there's something new you have not thought of, to just say, great, well, let's move this and then let's add something later.
You can say that about the entire master plan, because that's the whole point of the master plan, is that we issue it and then the council takes it from there. And this is just one little element, it's just one little part, cleaning it up,
Okay.
not trying to reinvent the wheel here in the whole entire ordinance.
Okay.
So Chairman, we should just have the record reflect that saying the heart came to the board at 7:10, so she can vote.
Is there any other discussion on the signed ordinances?
You just, I guess just more of a point of order, but we need, since this is a public hearing, we need to actually open that and vote, no?
So again, it's, the board can decide
Okay, that's
to
what you
take
said
public
initially,
comment,
okay.
exactly. Now, everyone can't see, but there's no one in the public, so
Gotcha.
if you wanted to entertain comments from the public, then you certainly can do that.
So there's not, we don't have to,
Nope.
okay, got it.
I just wanted to make sure from a council perspective that when you all are sitting in front of your constituents, our neighbors, that you're not at a loss for responses. That's all. So if there was any discussion, you could say, oh, we did have discussion regarding that. So I think that's it. That's all I can think about, or think of from a scrubbing perspective.
Do we need a motion to carry it to the council?
So your motion is going to have to be that the ordinances as presented, and we should indicate which ones, because I think all of them, including the ones amending the HPC, have been sent by the council back to the board, correct?
But we have to add the HPC then, because it's not specifically on, it's sign ordinances on the agenda.
Okay, so let's talk about what happened at the council. Did all of them come back? Or all of them recommended to come back, including the HPC?
Well, we voted on all of them at once, we didn't have individual
Okay.
votes.
They introduced them by title only, so the HPC, which had sign ordinances in there.
Correct.
We also changed that one, I think it was a paragraph, that sort of moved to, and streamlined a resident to be able to start work on their property once they got HPC approval. And then it went right to the zoning officer.
Exactly.
And did not have to get, I hate the term, but did not have to get rubber stamped by this board at our next meeting. But if it was denied, the applicant had every right to come in front of our board for, I don't know if the right word is an appeal, to seek relief.
Correct.
So it was purely meant to streamline for residents and allow them to start working once they got the approval of our own HPC.
And then the zoning officer.
I did check the agenda, I'm sorry, I did check the agenda for the 20th council meeting, and all 4 of the ordinances plus the sign table were included in one ordinance,
Okay.
2019-12.
Since the HPC ordinance is on the agenda for review, I just want to say I've looked through your master plan as well in regard to HPC policies, and the ordinance is not inconsistent with any of the goals and objectives about promoting and advancing historic preservation in the borough, and then it is consistent with other policy recommendations we throughout the re-examination report that talk about making the borough more business friendly and application friendly. So while the signed ordinance is specifically consistent, the HPC ordinance is generally consistent.
So before we make that motion, is there any other discussion amongst the board on either side?
Okay, so then your motion is that the sign ordinances as discussed are specifically consistent with the master plan. The HPC ordinance as discussed is generally consistent with the master plan. There are no other reviews, proposed revisions, amendments, or recommendations. Since there are no inconsistencies, and the ordinances that we are discussing are all of those that were included in Council Ordinance 2019-12, referring them to the Planning Board for review, and specifically that's Section 1400, Section 2631, Section 1404, Section 1631, and the sign table.
So,
That's it.
I'm sorry, I'm not, I am second guessing you, I was gonna say, I'm not second guessing, but I
Go
just,
ahead.
is that all? I just wanted to make sure that that was all of it. I think it is. Yeah, okay.
Can I ask something before we vote on this?
Mm-hmm, sure.
And I apologize if this was addressed before I came in. From section 2631 signs, A15. The default
Yes.
to allow the banner to be placed in an area to be determined later because the streetscape project is going to, I thought we were going to address that in that paragraph there. The streetscape project will be affecting that location, and it's not that that banner might not be able to be hung in that location sometime in the future, but I thought we were gonna make it a little more vague so that we could address the fact that we will be losing that location officially soon, and we may need to move it somewhere else, either temporarily or permanently.
So, yeah, the way it's worded right now is across Main Street. It used to be
Between the
worded,
historic courthouse.
no, that's stricken.
Oh, it's not on our copy.
It's not
No,
on
it's not
this.
in
our- Oh, really?
That's why I'm asking.
Oh,
Oh, that's weird, because it's on both of ours, the May 15th and the May
And
22nd.
the one that went to council had it stricken too.
This was
Okay.
taken from the most recent that I had.
Okay, it's stricken on this one, next to me, but it's not stricken on the one
Yeah, no, I
that's on my
see,
desk.
yeah, I see the one, this one.
Is it possible that perhaps it's just the wrong photocopy was put here on my desk before the meeting?
No, mine says the same thing, but I know that the one that went to council said.
Yeah, but see, this one is written correctly.
Yeah, the two that I have, the one that was before the board for the last time we reviewed it on the 15th, and then the one that was generated May 22nd after the board reviewed it, both of those have them stricken.
Okay, if it's going through like this, then it's fine. The one that I was looking at here doesn't have that. I'm sure the electronic copy I was sent has it,
I'm trying to, my fingers
I don't-
don't.
the one I have here on my desk that was sitting here when I arrived doesn't have it. I do apologize.
I had the same one you have.
Okay.
That it was introduced.
It was not, this version is not.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think we're
The
good.
one dated
If you're
May
clear.
15th, 2019 is what we're voting on, correct?
There's a later.
May
date.
20.
May 22nd, but that paragraph reads the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, well then that's not right.
So specifically, we're voting on the document that was dated May 22nd, which may or may not be the printed copy that you have.
Okay, I just need to clarify that.
Yes,
That's
correct.
the one we're voting on is May 22nd. All right, thank you.
And we can put that in the report it's going to go to. I don't know how you typically do it, if you want me to do the report, if Eileen usually does the report.
Well, I think as
Beth
long
does
as,
the report however we do this.
Shouldn't it be the one dated May 28th that came back from council?
28.
I don't have one dated the 28th, but
Whatever
presumably,
council sent back. The one
presumably,
that council sent back is the one that Mike has, but it's not the one that I have or Susan has.
okay, so we need to be specific here, because what, the May 22nd should have been the exact same, even if it was redated by council, as the May 28th. Because it was, from what I understand, introduced by title, no changes,
Yeah.
nothing else. So that should have been exactly the same.
The 22nd and the 28th should have been the same.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Well, Mike has here is not either, so.
Yeah, I didn't have a date on mine either, so.
I have the May 22nd, where it does have at the very, like it's page 1.
Yeah.
With the cross out and maybe at a location approved by the council. That's what was printed.
Correct.
Okay.
If there was no changes by council, it would be the one that's
Yeah.
dated May 22nd, approved by, or introduced by council on May 28th.
Correct.
That's how it should be. The resolution, that is.
good catches. Okay.
Are we,
So, motion and a second.
So moved.
I'm sorry, I missed the motion. Sorry.
That's it.
Mayor and Mike.
Thank you. Any other discussions? Mayor Driver?
Yes.
Mr. Campion?
Yes.
Ms. Giffen? Yes. Mrs. Engelhardt?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Pedrick? Mr. Runyon?
Yes.
Mr. Budney?
Yes.
Mr. Hand?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We're getting there. We're getting there.
Has the council, just so I know, has the council deemed a second hearing date yet?
June 10th.
Okay, so that does give us the ability to do a resolution adopting the report on the 25th meeting. And then that
Is that
report,
what we need, or is there, is it?
It has to be 35 days, right?
it has to be 35
Within
days.
35 days.
So 35 days from the 28th. Okay, so you've authorized the issuance of a report. Since we have the time, I would advise that you adopt a resolution.
On the June 20.
Exactly, on the May, I'm sorry.
June.
It is June 10th, right, Chris?
Hold on, I've got my months screwed
Yeah,
up.
no, that is.
Thinking I'm still
Council
in
meeting
May.
is the 10th.
June 10th, yeah.
All right, so, okay.
So-
So you don't have to, if it's gonna be reintroduced on the 10th, we can just with the, again, we're not making any recommendations, all we're doing is deeming it to be consistent by way of a report. It's not required. If we had the time, I would say, fine, we
A
can
full
adopt a resolution.
but this would just be a note from Eileen.
Yeah, I
That's
think in
fine.
2018, when we did the BAS zone, adding something, amending that
So
ordinance.
we can just
We
get
did
that.
a simple letter saying that the board met and discussed and found that was consistent, was specifically consistent for the sign ordinances and generally consistent for the agency.
Oh,
Perfect, easy.
thank you. All right, moving right down to chair items. Typically, we have a spot for HPC comments. We don't have anybody that's in the audience from the HPC. Is there, actually, there's nobody here. So, and I think just while we're on the HPC comments, no HPC applications at all?
No, we met on the 21st,
So that there was
HPC
nothing
didn't
in
even
between.
meet in between
Yeah,
those
okay.
dates.
I thought
The
they
next
were-
one
I
is-
thought they were having John come to the next meeting. Remember we were all-
June 11th.
Oh, okay. Is that the
That's
day
June
that
11th.
he's presenting the?
He's presenting the map, and then we have the map coming here on the 25th.
Okay. So if
So
anybody
there's no HPC
plans on
applications.
attending,
They
just
have
let everybody else know, so there's no
That's our
quorum.
last meeting.
Okay. Our next meeting is June 25th. It's a Tuesday on the agenda so far, other than Mr. Hatch coming to address the board. Is there anything? Could have
We do
HPC
now.
applications? Should they
We,
have-
yeah, possibly would have some HPC applications at that point. They meet on the 11th, and then I think again, in 2 weeks' time, which actually, I think is gonna be the day after our 25th meeting.
Okay. And,
But at that point, the ordinances wouldn't even if, say that the council adopted them, it would, they still wouldn't be enacted by then, so.
I probably said this last time, but I won't be here on the 25th.
okay. Anybody else that's not here on the 25th? Okay. And other chair items would be what Mayor started talking about before was our Opportunity Zone Summit. As you all know, Flemington has been identified as the only Opportunity Zone in Hunterdon County, but certainly one of many, I think 70-something within the state.
78 or so.
Opportunity. So what's going to happen is there is an Opportunity Zone Committee that Susan sits on from the planning board. I sit on as an alternate. And the idea is that on July 11th, there will be an invitation-only, registration-only event scheduled for developers, bankers, real estate professionals to be able to come and explore Flemington and understand what we're all about. We are fairly close, if not exact, to an agenda, which includes a session on the planning board, a session about zoning, my notes right. An introduction on why Flemington from both Mark Salick, the Director of Economic Development, as well as Mayor, and then a keynote speaker, keeping our fingers crossed during lunch, that we could have somebody as exhilarating as Cory Booker. If not, I think we'll get a video.
So if you can't make it in person, we'll send us a video.
Okay.
I haven't heard yet from the governor's office either. If they both confirm yes, I don't know what I'll do.
Oh, yeah, that was, we should have such issues. And then after lunch, a property tour and some a demographic presentation of Flemington, and wrapping it up with.
This one's still
Yeah,
good.
wrapping it up with at Lone Eagle. So what I ask of this board is, I know it is during the day. It is certainly not a public meeting. The day off. I believe Susan took the day off. But certainly from a participation perspective, if you want to participate, let me know. Beth and Kara to be available to participate. And we're really, it's a fast-moving, fast-paced agenda coming together to make sure that we deliver, in essence, a why Flemington within our town. But there'll be opportunities to walk people around town, look at certain sites, understand. We're going to ask, within our planning board session, we'll ask the HPC to do something. When I say something, it's a short why Flemington. What makes us different from the other 76 communities where somebody could invest their money? So again, this is public comment on that we're doing it from a planning.
Since we nailed the catering, had a conversation today. I got an attorney group out of Princeton to pay for the happy hour networking at Lone Eagle. So we're going to rent the entire second
great.
floor. It will be a private event. We're working on getting the sponsor to perhaps pay for a trolley to go around. So during the 2-hour, I scheduled a 2-hour networking because that way we'll have a trolley that can come around and pick people up and say, hey, you want to go see town? Drive around town. So we're all working on that.
Okay. Susan, any other comments on anything for the?
We didn't get bills down this
No.
one, no, if they were.
No, I just meant from the chair perspective.
No.
I did get an email from Jim.
Yeah, that's me.
Oh, yeah.
From Jim regarding the opportunity to have somebody speak regarding the C1 designation that we all put through and sent a letter. So Jim, why don't you summarize both for this board as well as council, who you met with and what it could possibly mean for the borough?
Well, I think, as I told you, I warned the board that I was going to the RHA meeting the next day after our discussion on the C1 here. And when they were 2 units, one was South Branch Watershed, the other was Upper Raritan. I was president of South Branch for about 4 years, and the person I'm recommending was our executive director, Bill Kibler, who's the policy director now for Raritan Headwaters Association. And as I also mentioned at the last meeting, when you read through the DEP diatribe on C1s, the initials RHA or Raritan Headwaters shows up quite a bit because of the water quality studies that they've done over a period of almost 30 years now. It's the biggest and the most widespread one in the state, and the only one that's really recognized by the state as being qualified. And as an example of some of the things that they've been doing, you've heard about the river cleanup every year. They had 1,700 people participate in the watershed this year at 170 locations. That was from back when we did it, 20, maybe 200. So, I mean, their ability to get out into the watershed and talk to people about various things is quite big through the entire watershed. And Bill is a person that I think could talk to the board from the scientific standpoint, from the, I understand C1, I understand business issues and these sorts of things, but also give to you why he considers it to be important. He's a staunch advocate for the C1, but at the same time he understands existing conditions versus new or primal, open land that has to be developed as a C1. I think he could give you a perspective on those if you would wish to do that. He said he'd be willing to come down and talk to one or both.
I think it would be excellent to
So
educate
we
ourselves
actually
on it.
also had our environmental attorney come in, Diane Alexander.
Mm-hmm.
So who also did a presentation, and she said pretty much the opposite of Bill Hibbler.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, everybody's got issues.
everybody has issues, yeah. Because Mr. Hibbler spoke at the Freeholders meeting I was at. He'll adamantly say that, for instance, the Agway property, if the tributary there, if the Bushkill tributary that runs along the northern edge, according to maps released by the DEP in the middle of May, will require a 150-foot buffer, or a 300-foot buffer on that.
Mm-hmm.
We have a developer looking at that property. Can't have both.
Very true.
You Yes, but he'll
Are
tell
people
you
willing
that won't
to, are people willing to listen to both sides?
Yeah, well, the comment period also closed today.
Well,
but not-
that's true, but you gotta be willing to listen to both sides so that you hear it, you got your.
Yeah,
I think
no,
we
and
just-
I understand what you're saying, however, I think that as we represent this borough, we should also pay very close attention to what our professionals
Oh,
are
absolutely.
saying, who advise, as opposed to the lobbyists.
And should also, he's not a lobbyist, he works for the Brereton, he testifies at the state level quite frequently, and probably it would be good to listen to your own environmental commission too.
Yeah, I like the idea of, even though comment section is over, we've already voiced our concern, opinion, if you will, from both planning board as well as council. And I guess it was just one of those, I wanted to bring it up because I didn't want to be,
Yeah.
Jim was
Yeah,
sharing.
No,
and-
absolutely,
And to
and
say
I
like,
understand what you're saying, however, I do think that we have a responsibility to pay attention to what our attorneys and professionals who are charged with making sure that this borough is able to develop the best way it can.
Absolutely.
And I would disagree that he's not a lobbyist.
so, but
He's an
the,
advocate.
the one thing
That's better.
that I did like is to be able to hear from an advocate that was in the what if scenario. What if this did proceed the way it is? Where does that leave us? And I personally thought it was a bit premature to hear from Mr. Hibbler, but I said, well, you know what? It's an interesting point. Jim did go out on a limb to talk to him
Yeah.
about us, and I just thought I'd bring it up to you all to say it could just be an interesting. Could be an interesting 15-minute session in front of us over the summer when there's really not a lot of activity going on.
I
But-
don't think it can hurt to be fully educated on the subject, and I apologize, I didn't realize that the attorney had spoken to council, or else I would have gone to that meeting, so now I have to go back and watch it, but if the council has any other
Yeah, I would say.
sessions like that, I'd love it
Why
if
don't
they
we
would,
look-
give us a heads up, because we would at least tune in that night.
Yeah, we had our geologist come in, was there one day available for questions. We had the attorney come in during the work session and talk about it.
So my recommendation would be if we could ask Mr. Hibbler to say, I mean, this is my opinion, I don't think I need to hear about the merits of the C1 designation because I really don't, I get it, I understand it.
Oh, yeah.
But I want to hear about the merits, but then what does that mean for a town? Because I don't quite understand when it sounds so idyllic to be able to say, oh, but there's a tributary, you want to protect that. The fact that we have a tributary that's buried underneath the street, that's been buried for 100 years, I personally don't understand it. I don't understand how that could be classified as the same thing of a, I think when people hear tributary, it's like, oh, it's the, I get it.
The tributary that showed up on the map in mid-May runs along the northern border rather than the one that goes to the, under the street.
Oh, good, so that one was already gone.
So when you
I
go
stand
up
corrected.
Walter Ferran and you cross over and there's like that swampy area behind Bones End, that's the area that.
Generally conduited sections are not counted
Oh, okay.
from the
It was just-
map.
So it's that swampy area, it's a little swampy closer to Ferran. When you get further behind like the apartments up on North Main Street, it's really no more than a ditch.
So, any other comments? Is it something, Susan, you had said it'd be interesting to educate ourselves?
I'm open to hearing everybody, I think it's a good opportunity that, Jim has this contact, and I think it's a good opportunity for us to educate ourselves, so I'm all for it.
Yeah, just tell me when and
We'll just
I'll
look
ask him if he
at,
could
we'll
make
look
it.
at the calendar and see.
On the language and the night.
Right.
Then we can go drink.
So, okay, is
So
everybody
everything
good with
goes at
that? All right, and the one, I'm sorry, I completely forgot. I know that the Chamber of Commerce is going to come in front of this board for their addition. That, if you remember, we heard it during an informal about what they wanted to do. And it was more complicated than we had thought, because they didn't have the parking, they were looking, I'm paraphrasing, so it could be completely wrong. What I remember and recollect was, they wanted to build a portion, but then not get a CO, and they had a lot of interesting questions and a lot of interesting proposals, and we said, listen, you just can't come in front of the board, why don't we get a technical review committee and work with you as the applicant before you come in front of the board like we've done before. So now I did talk to Chris Valen, and he said, listen, can we get a technical review committee? So I'm soliciting, I said, well, a lot of times we don't have one technical review committee because it's based on people's schedules, and do you want to meet in the morning, do you want to meet in the afternoon, just to keep things going. They had said that they would work around anybody's schedule. So as much as I love to participate in technical review committees, I just don't think I have the bandwidth with everything else going on. So I was asking if there's other folks that may want to be on a technical review committee. I need no more than 3, plus our professionals, to work with the Chamber of Commerce. And it is within our jurisdiction, right?
Correct.
It's
allowed by ordinance.
No, meaning that because it's the chamber, it's not a.
It's from my research, it's a private entity. This is
Okay.
not a public governmental agency. It's a private business entity. I'll certainly confirm that and ask Chris some additional questions, but I've been involved with Chris, I've been involved with the chamber.
I know, but it was a little bit reminding me of
I
like
did
with
look,
the
just to make
gazebo
sure.
and it being that it was a county property, and I just wanted to make sure that,
Yeah.
as long as we had jurisdiction, if there are folks that have an interest in their, I mean, you can see what they want to do, it's on the front lawn with the big thermometer as they're raising money. So if there was anybody interested,
You know, frankly, I know you, Betsy, and myself are pretty swamped with this opportunity zone meeting in the next month, so, but I want to also mention that the chamber is really being very supportive and helping with this opportunity, so meeting, so it would really mean a lot if somebody other than the 3 of us could step up and be part of that technical review committee, because they are a really important part of not only the town, but just the upcoming event as well. So I want to be as supportive as I can, but I agree, I think we're a little run thin at this.
and I think for the new members on the board, what a technical review committee does is meet with the applicant, you know, typically off hours, we don't do it during the day because everybody has their day jobs, and we really try to hash out issues and say, oh, you know what, you're gonna really need to seek that if you're looking for this, or have you considered all the things that we can't do as a board, as we sit with an applicant in front of us, you can sort of iron out. We have, you know, we'll have either one, if not both, of our professionals there. Sometimes it's more planning, sometimes it's more
Civil.
Civil.
Yeah, it's like civil. Depends on the.
What kind of timeframe are you looking at for this? Is this the next month or 2?
I think it was within the next month. Chris had said they're almost ready to submit, and can we just do a technical review committee first? So I would say it would be imminent. I'm thinking that I'd like to be able to get back to them and say, we have a technical review committee, so-and-so will be the lead, and please coordinate meetings with them, and I think you'll get meetings right away.
How do you usually do this? You ask for 3 copies of whatever it is they're going to submit, so you have something ahead of time to look at? Do they bring it
We
with
have
them to
not.
a
It
meeting?
varies.
It varies.
Sometimes we'll get some of things electronically, sometimes we'll just literally walk in and they'll have this
Okay.
is what we printed out last night,
Okay.
and then they go back, you know, if their application is pending, they want just a little FaceTime with a couple members to iron out some of the bigger questions, and then they're gonna go back, clean it up, and then put their application.
Before they submit their whatever, our link up.
I just didn't know if you'd like to look at something ahead of time to be prepared, or, you know.
Ideally, if you had more information, the more productive
Sure.
meeting is going to be.
It completely depends on the applicant.
Okay.
I'm happy to be involved, but I don't think I can lead it because I just don't have the experience on the plan. I think we need another experienced planning board
Okay.
member as well to be
Thank
involved.
you.
I'll check my schedule and see if I
You
can.
can put me down.
Okay.
That's great, thank you guys.
Be a fourth arm.
Oh, Mark's off on Mondays. Look at that. Volunteer for anything we need on a Monday.
Happy hour at Mark's house.
There you go.
All right, thanks, guys. So then why don't I ask, you know, is anybody, Brian, you or Mark are willing to lead the effort, or you want to do it together as a trifecta?
I have to check with Scott
Check.
first. I'm tentative.
You're tentative, okay. And there's nothing saying that we need to have, actually, I think we do have an ordinance that says it's 3 members of the board.
I'm almost positive.
I'm almost positive we said 3, so I do need 3. So,
Todd, if Brian's stuck on.
thank you.
I'll let you know soon.
Okay. And you may, what I may do is reach out to, I can reach out on the board's behalf to Chris. And I think I'm going to see him at Hack Hunterdon this weekend, so.
See him on Friday too.
Yeah, so, and I'll say who the members are, and we'll start an email. And he would have to post escrow before we would meet, because we have to get our professionals. Right?
That has always, that's kind of varied as well, frankly.
I know the
Generally-
ordinance does say that they are responsible for
Yeah.
payment of professionals. I
Right.
don't know how it's been.
So it may not have to be
Shepherded.
escrowed to start, it may just be a bill.
It's not that
Generally, we
specific.
do ask
from what I remember.
for, at least to cover the board's professionals
Okay, I'll tell them.
invoices.
Yeah, it clearly says that they're responsible for payment. So however that's shepherded is kind of up to you guys.
Okay. Great, thank you. I did not see any bills this evening.
No, there was no bills.
All right, so we'll
Just
move
get that
right on to the next item.
the record.
We do not have any as needed executive session, so I'll move past. So item number 9 is adjournment at 7:45, which
Yay.
makes up for all the times we're at 11, just if we average it out.
Yeah, over.
All right, so motion to adjourn,
So moved.
all in favor?
Bye.
Any opposed? Thanks, everyone.
Here, should I just get right this? Is this like an error version?
Yeah, so
I swear I got it.